Everyone knows Star Wars. Star Wars is great. Well, mostly great. Personally, I believe one of the best ways to experience Star Wars is through the medium of video games. And two of the best examples of that would be through Knights of the Old Republic 1 and 2. We could talk about these games individually, but apart from the story and some minor gameplay changes, they're essentially the same. That's not to say they're not both worth playing, far from it, but it is safe to say that if you like one, you'll like the other. So let's just mash them together and talk about both.
Three.
In terms of story, I won't go into too much detail here since I do think the stories are best experienced firsthand. And if you haven't played these games before, the story is a major reason to play them. The first game, Knights 1, deals with two Sith rivals, Revan and Malak. I will admit, while I do love the story of the first game, overall it's nothing we haven't seen before in Star Wars. It's well written, and the fact that the story hits familiar beats doesn't really hinder the game at all. It's worth noting that you've probably seen this song and dance before. Knights 2 has a focus on the Force as a whole, and yes, they're still light and dark, but the lines between them get blurry, and with the Jedi Council making more and more questionable decisions, the dark side starts seeming more and more like a realistic solution. What elevates these stories, though, is the characters. Bastila, Karth, Kreia, Atton, and my personal favorite, HK-47. These characters do more than just throw words at you. They've been made in such a way that they act like real people. Couple that with this being a video game, and naturally you end up spending a lot of time with these people. They talk a lot, sure, but these are some of the most real-feeling Star Wars characters we've ever had. Not only do they act like real people towards you, but each other too. You really do have a Scooby Gang of characters following you around the galaxy, and seeing how everybody reacts towards your actions makes it worth going through the game multiple times to see what's on offer. I don't want to say too much else about the story, like I said, but I do think it's best experienced firsthand. That being said, let's talk about combat, as it's the other thing you'll be spending most of your time doing, besides talking. Combat runs off some sort of D&D system, don't ask me which one, but basically you take your stat modifier for whatever you're trying to attack or defend with, and add it to a dice that's rolled in the background. Essentially, you want your funny numbers to be higher than your enemy's angry numbers. Thankfully, this all happens in the background, so combat stays fast enough to not be boring, but slow enough to where you can pause the action and really strategize against some of the tougher enemies. There's a decent amount of depth here with the combat, from special attacks to force powers to grenades and other consumable items. There's a lot of loot in these games, and with the generous level cap, you'll be constantly improving your character throughout the game, and you will get very, very powerful by the end of the game. So overall, combat is a lot of fun. It can take a bit to get the hang of how everything works, as with any good RPG, but things here are simple enough to get a decent grasp early on, but offers enough depth for those looking to make specialized builds. The graphics, well, this was the early 2000s, so things look good, but not great. The original Knights game on PC doesn't even have widescreen support outside of mods. The image still looks sharp enough to clearly show everything you need to see, and there's a lot of variation in color from character to character and location to location. So the art design of everything does wonders to hold up the visuals. That being said though, these games have recently found a new home on the Nintendo Switch, and I gotta say, it's the perfect home for them. This was a console-first title, so while the keyboard and mouse is a perfectly fine way to play the game, the controller is where it's at. Selecting different abilities, highlighting different enemies and characters and loot containers, it all works perfectly on the controller. And while Knights 2 does have some controller support on PC, it's not quite perfect and needs a bit of fidgeting to get working. The Switch versions, on the other hand, obviously work perfectly with controller, and both games run at a fairly consistent 60 frames per second while offering native widescreen support. While the latest gaming landscape fills our stores with games designed to never be put down and never stop demanding money, it's important to note that gaming has not always been this way. Knights of the Old Republic games are a perfect example of that. Games that respect your time, games that have a clear beginning, middle, and end, games that you pay for once and get the full experience, and most importantly, games that are fun. These titles, 20 years later, still hold up because of the design and the talent that went into them. They deserve to be in everyone's library.